how they could make it possible all across the globe. Talk about UK, France, Canada, or in Australia, how these teams operated. In UK, it's almost like 100,000 people marched on the streets. In France, it's like 15,000 people marched on the street. In Canada, it's like 10,000 people marched on. So, and how this eruption, where all these days it was hiding, and who operated this, how they get connected together.
It
What
happened
is
in plain
this?
sight.
So how this is really something that how long they've been working on this one.
It happened in plain sight. In plain sight. And it has been reported in the news for many years. There have been many people who have been raising red flags. They've been warning people, and they just get labeled racists or Islamophobes. But there are many people who have been sounding the alarm about this. The idea of a global jihad, that is not new. That's nothing new. Okay. Uh, when when there were calls for intifada, uh, there have so far been three noticeable intifadas. Um, every single time they called for global intifada. Intifada means uprising in Arabic, but it doesn't refer to just normal uprising in the sense of rebelling against a corrupt government. When they say uprising, they mean uprising in order to murder civilians, specifically Jewish civilians. Okay, that's in the Palestinian context. But we know that that's just one aspect of a broader, a greater Islamic extremist context where it's indiscriminate. Maybe it starts with Jews, but it ultimately leads to the murder of Christians, of Hindus, of Buddhists, and atheists, whoever disagrees with Islam, their version of Islam. But that's nothing new. Okay, that what is new is that over the last 15 years, there's been a massive wave of immigrants from the Middle East, from Islamic countries that have poured into Europe and into Canada, into Australia. And these immigrants, you know, anyone who opposes it, they simply say, oh, you hate brown people. That's been the argument. Oh, you're just racist if someone opposes it. And racism, of course, actually exists. But the opposition to these massive waves of immigrants has not predominantly been because of the color of their skin.
Hmm.
I'll give you a great example. Uh, President Trump's so-called, and I really want to capitalize that if I could, so-called Muslim ban, right? All of his political opponents made an uproar about his Muslim ban. He banned the immigration of people from specific countries, all of which happen to be Muslim. Okay, so that's how they made the excuse. Oh, it's a Muslim ban. It's terrible. He's just racist. And I don't know since when Muslim has been a race. It's not a race. It's an ideology, a religious ideology. But you did not have to be a genius to understand that this was not a Muslim ban because the Trump administration did not ban the immigration uh, of poor people, of educated people. He did not ban their immigration from all Muslim countries. He banned immigration from specific countries that are Muslim. Okay, not all Muslim countries. There are roughly 50 something Muslim countries in the world. If I remember correctly, it was about between seven, I don't remember the exact number, between 7 and 10 countries that are Muslim. If it was a Muslim ban, he would have banned more than 50 countries. Really, probably more than 70. So the point I'm trying to get at is that people have been talking about this problem for more than a decade. And every time that they point out that there's a serious problem here, then political opponents who are overwhelmingly on the political left simply try to shoot down the warnings by saying, "Oh, you're just racist." Okay, and again, you can't. It's a shame that I have to say it so many times because I don't have the privilege of having darker skin. I have other privileges for having lighter skin. I don't deny that, but in Western society, they are obsessed with race. Obsessed, and not every individual, but in politics, they're obsessed with race. But the reality is that people of every race have certain privileges depending on the context that you're in. So if you're a darker skinned person and you live or you go to a country where most people have darker skin, you're not going to stand out as much as somebody who has lighter skin, and you're probably going to be discriminated against less. It's just reality. Maybe you'll be discriminated in negative ways or positive ways, but people might treat you differently. The same is true if you're lighter skin. When it comes to politics in the Western world, if you have lighter skin and you say anything uh, about anyone who happens to have darker skin, if someone does not like what you're saying, they can make the cheap argument that, oh, you're just being racist. And for most news networks in the United States, in Europe, in most news networks, if they make this argument, well, then that just shut down the whole argument. No, they automatically win.
Hmm.
And it's not logical. It's not honest. It's a dishonest method. Again, if President Trump's restrictions on immigration from those certain Muslim countries was racist, then he would have banned it from all countries with people who have darker skin, which is not what happened. Not at all what happened. He specified certain Islamic countries that have unique problems of terrorism, unique issues of terrorism, exporting terrorists and funding terrorists, terrorist organizations. Those are the countries that he wanted to ban immigration from. And what happened was the radical leftist forces of Western society did the exact opposite of what they should have done. And they opened their doors, particularly, especially to people from the worst societies of the Islamic world. And it doesn't matter what their religion was. Okay, we can argue back and forth whether it's because of their Muslim beliefs or some other beliefs. But the fact of the matter is that those particular countries are major funders of terrorism, murder of civilians around the world. Those particular, if they were Christian, it would be the same problem. If they were white or Chinese or black African, I don't care what. It doesn't matter. What matters is the behavior, and they happen to be Muslim.
I
I
mean,
do believe that.
recently, if you see, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Recently, if you see in the newspaper, there is a pastor in South Africa.
Hmm.
He has, I think, 100,000 membership in his congregation. Maybe multiple congregations he might be having, but in his group he
Okay.
has like 100,000, and all of them together converted into Islam.
Wow.
L- I couldn't believe that. They follow the leader, and the leader announces one day, "We are going to convert Islam." Everybody convert. It's called Corinthian Church in
Wow.
South Africa. I couldn't believe that. How it's possible? I mean, like 10 people, 15 people, 20 people, that's fine. Maybe even 100 people, it's okay. It's about 100,000 people. How come they can think alike? To
Wow.
convince, to convince. This is what I couldn't believe that because
I doubt
in the,
that they were all convinced. I doubt
I'm
it.
not sure.
All you have to
This is the
do is
news.
all you have to do is provide some sort of financial or nutritional incentive. You just need to get the people dependent on you, your congregation. If you have a good charity going, and a lot of them are dependent on you for food, or even if you're not completely dependent on you, but you're helping them a lot with food or some other financial thing, well, then they're going
Uh,
to be a lot more open to listening to you. And that's usually the way that it goes. usually the way that it goes.
Yeah, the people, what I'm talking about is when I started the question about how come these many people were, coming out on the streets and supporting Palestine and different
Hmm.
countries and different numbers of people. They're not only Islam people, they're people
Yeah,
out of any religion.
yeah, yeah.
Every So they all joined together. That's what it is. Like how and Hamas was warning always, all the time. They said that we are having a huge network.
Hmm.
You wait and see how it's going to affect. Our network is huge than anybody else, so you're going to see what consequences you're going to get it. So that's what they showed up, and still they're showing that the countries in different places and different areas. How come these people gather? I mean, how they initiate all these things. That's kind of a little bit a scary one. In this war, it is exhibited, not in any other play, any other times. It wasn't like this before. This is the first time ever happening across the world that people coming out and like kind of getting a voice for this. Um, this Israel. That's why I asked: is there any prophetical thing is getting revealed or something? Because the world will come against Israel. Like.
I can't I can't debate something that I haven't researched in depth, but I do know that this is not the first time that there have been international riots against Israel. Now, you could be right that this is the first time there have been such large numbers. Maybe that's true. I don't know. But this was also a war where we had the highest numbers of pro-Israel supporters as well marching. I'm not really
Oh yeah.
sure. I'm not really sure that the numbers are higher, and maybe they are. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know for myself, but even if they are higher, it could be also because of social media. People have much greater ability to communicate now, to spread information, whether it's true or false. It's much easier. At the click of a button, you can send it to 100 different friends. So people
Oh,
feel, whether they're actually educated or not, people feel more educated than they used to. Could have been in the past, they felt more like maybe they were more aware of their ignorance. And if you're aware of your ignorance, you're more likely to be humble and not do these stupid things. But
no, I
go ahead.
agree. The global population has increased, like when you compare to some years back. Right now, the global population itself increased a lot. So
Correct.
there should be numbers and hike is also comparative. When you see that, of course, it's going to be like that. But there is another phenomena now. Right now, another thing is coming up. It's really shocking to me. That's why one of my questions. The in especially in America, the youth, the young generation, they're kind of leaning towards Osama bin Laden.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
What's going on? What is that? What's happening there? Did you see that?
And, yeah, I've heard about it. It's hard to say that that's the majority, but even when we mention about majorities, if the majority is not as bad as we might think, but if that majority, which is not that bad, is silent, then it's kind of irrelevant. And that's true whether we're talking about the majority of Palestinian Arabs, who maybe the majority of them do not want to see every Jew murdered. I don't know. But if that majority is silent and letting a minority call the shots, then the majority is really invalid. The same is true with Jews regarding any matter. The same is true with Americans. So I really find it hard to believe that the majority of American youth support Osama bin Laden. I highly doubt it. But if the majority of American youth are pretty much quiet on the topic, they're silent, but that part of American youth which is making a loud voice are the ones who are supporting it, then it doesn't matter what the majority is. What matters is the one, is the population that's making the noise. That's what matters, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Um, I think that this whole thing is a consequence of a conscious effort in the US education system, and certainly not every single teacher. I don't even think most teachers. But I do think this is the case in the US education system for the majority of influencers of the US education system, the policymakers, that they have had a clear agenda since around the 1960s and continuing into the 70s, where you had uh, educators, professors immigrating to the U.S. who were coming over here, bringing their communist ideas into the United States with full intention to transform the United States into a communist society. And there has been a conscious effort in the education establishment of the US to use the educational system in the US to transform the US into a communist country. And this is part of it. Because the standard of living in the United States is much higher, even for poor people in the US, their standard of living is well above average income in poorer countries. Like most poor people in the US would be considered completely fine in most
Poor
less
countries.
developed. Right.
Yeah.
So because poverty is less of an issue in the US, it's mainly just among people who have no family, who are mentally ill, or drug addicts. Those are the only real impoverished people in the US. Excuse me. So because that's the issue, the typical or the traditional arguments of communists, which relies on uh, income inequality to be the main instigator of establishing a communist regime, since that's not as strong in the US, so they've had to put much more emphasis on uh, racial differences and also on they had to find other class differences. So because finances isn't as big of a thing, people, even most poor people in the US, are more or less comfortable, right? They may be upset that they don't have the car of their dreams or a big house, but as long as they have a cell phone, as long as they have a cell phone and they have a TV, they're and they have some food, which is not a problem for most, even not for most poor Americans, then they're happy. That's how Obama was one of the ways he won his election. He promised people free cell phones, and they were happy with that.
Yeah.
So what do? They don't
You don't
have
need
that issue.
you don't need
They
food
don't have,
food or anything. If you have a cell phone, you don't need food or anything, nothing. Yeah, just
of
go
course.
watch TikTok and
And it means that food is not really a problem that you have. If you're motivated by a cell phone, you're not really worried about what you're going to eat in your next meal, right?
Mm-mm.
So because we don't have that issue, and that was the traditional issue that communists use in Russia and in China to gain support. So what they have done is they've focused on race problems, race relations, and tried to find uh, other issues that categorize the population into opposing classes. So they focused on race, but they also focused on like LGBTQ issues, gay and straight issues. And it's not so much that these leaders really care about gay people, right? It's not so much that they care about trans people. That's the more recent issue. They don't really care, the leaders who are promoting this stuff, but they are using these issues in order to divide the country. And if you can put people against each other in the same country, then it's easier to make the country fall and then rebuild it in the image of your communist utopia, quote unquote utopia. And all of these issues are valid issues. There are problems between different racial communities, of course. Most people, whether they're conservative or liberal, right wing or left wing, most people know that racism exists. The question is, how do you solve it? And do you solve it by focusing more on the problem and giving a voice to the most extreme sides of both sides? Is that going to solve it? Or do you solve it by not giving attention to the most extreme voices? Do you solve it by giving a voice to the moderate voices? Do you solve these problems by giving a voice to the people who are not extreme, who actually want to solve the issue? The Communist Party, and it's not only the literal Communist Party, there are communists in the Democrat Party in the United States. Their methodology is not to give strength to the people in the middle. Their methodology is to amplify the extreme voices. And that's how you know that their intention is to destroy the establishment that we have, which is not perfect, but it's a lot better than what they want to create. They somehow think that if they create a communist society in the United States, they're going to do it better than the Russians or the Chinese have done. And of course, they're arrogant fools for thinking that. And there are people who will say, "Oh, it's not communism; it's socialism." You have the same basic problem, and communist leaders have taught from the beginning that socialism is a necessary step to communism. So it's really just a different approach and how to get to the same thing, which is an unjust society. It's only good in theory, but that's the cause of this. They've wanted people from unstable countries to come in, from the least stable Islamic countries, to come in to the Western world intentionally to upset the establishment and make it more easy to completely replace the democratic sort of, I don't like the term democratic, but that's what most people think of as fair elections. They want to get
So
rid of that.
socialistic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, this is really unbelievable because the immorality reached its heights like never ever before. Like like LGBTQ you were talking about in India, it's so prevalent. It used to be like hidden. It never
Hmm.
comes out. So it's not socially accepted in India. But right now we could able to see all these marchings on the streets, main streets,
Hmm.
with these people, and there are so many things happening. It's something like the way that the world been infected by these things. The immorality is so high.
I think that the immorality is not. I'm very different from the average religious person when it
Thinkers.
comes to these topics. I'm very different. I recognize that. So I don't really expect you or other people to agree with me on this. But I don't think that the immorality is in the fact that a person is